All right, hello everyone. We are live once again. Welcome back to Mission Top for this live stream for this topic today about trees. Mission Top is a farmstead and ranch. It is a family. It is a place for cultivating philosophia, which is the love of wisdom. And today, this topic is just another way of approaching what I think is maybe the most important topic right now, because it gets at maybe the undergirding, the fundamental nature of reality. So we're going to dive into that in just a sec. But it's kind of interesting how this topic arose this morning. As of this morning, I didn't know what I was going to talk about, and because we had a bit of a late start this morning, and that was because yesterday we had a youth group over in order to harvest a lamb, to slaughter it, to skin it, and to eviscerate it. And so that was a successful venture yesterday. And I know sometimes I open up these streams kind of giving these accounts of things that maybe don't seem related to the topics at hand, but I think they are important in as much as I don't see the world as disconnected in these ways. You know, in a pursuit of wisdom, to cultivate wisdom, all the principles we talk about are found within the way that we live out our lives. And so I try to give an account of the things we're doing here and ultimately the reasons why, because I do think that it's all related. So just to give a few visuals of what the end result was, I'm going to try to use more visuals when I can. Oops, this one's a little too big, but let me adjust right here. This is what my fridge is looking like this morning. When we got this place, we had an extra fridge. Oh, looks like it put the image the wrong way. If you can just imagine that rotated, because I don't know how to rotate this right now. This is what our fridge looks like this morning, an extra one that we have, with that eviscerated carcass hanging in it and ready to butcher today. So that was the end result. And then another great thing that's coming from this is not just these not just the meat itself, but also the hides. So I want to show you that real quick. And here is this image taken this morning of my daughter, who's doing a great job at preserving these hides. And hopefully you'll be able to see here, if I adjust this real quick. Yeah, these hides are ending up great. You wash them out, you preserve them with some salt. We're trying to avoid chemicals in order to preserve them. And this is going to be a tremendous resource. You can make clothes with this. You can use these for rugs. It's a great gift to give to somebody that's just had a baby. I guess the New Zealand has this tradition, in as much as they have a lot of sheep, where you give somebody a nice, fluffy, clean hide when they've had a baby, and it's a perfect thing to place a baby onto. But it makes a great rug. We're kind of imagining all the things we can do with this, and this is just such luxurious wool that is being produced, and we'll have quite a few of these. So I'm really proud of my daughter for diving in and trying to make use of these things, these renewable resources, as it were. And of course, at the end of the day, there was a living being that, in essence, gave itself. That was part of the deal, I guess you could say, we made with it, the covenant that we make with it here in Mission Top, that we give this flock of sheep a good life, the best life that we can imagine for these domesticated animals, in order to, again, we give that in order to take part of it, but at the same time maintain that regenerative resource going. And so anyway, those were those two things. Wiss, I see you're on here asking some questions, and yeah, you've already notice the image that I had on there. You say Yggdrasil. We'll get to that. So it says, so you took the carving animal dressing course. So yeah, the way that I got these skills, and that's one important part to realize, so many different aspects had to go into this. A knowledge of tools, a sharp knife being one of them. And it turns out getting a knife sharp, man, that is a skill to be developed. I'm not very good at it yet. I've maybe fully sharpened knives about 7 times, and I think I'm gonna need to get 15 to 20 times to really start getting it. And then of course it's a thing you can master. Some people, knife makers and things like that, spend years in their life developing that ability to sharpen a knife. So there's that, but then there's the skills of what to do how to do the slaughter and the kill cut, which is the most sobering part, how then to do all the skinning. So I have mostly learned this, yes, through doing a course through this resource that I was talking about yesterday, through the kind of weird stream that I did, a little bit different on just knives that I did yesterday. But it's the gentleman that I've really found the most valuable as far as the approach that I want to give this is a gentleman named the Farmstead Meatsmith. And he has a whole, he is in essence just a custom butcher, but he does classes and has a lot of online materials to learn this kind of stuff in the way that I want to, which is more the old world tradition, where you are making the most of all the different resources that the animal has to give, and then turning those resources, especially of course the meat, into the most delicious preserved end results that you can. So not just cuts of meat, but cured cuts of meat, sausage, salami, what else? Bacon, all these different ways all these skills that we used to know that so many of us have lost. And of course, I am mostly inspired by those who are over there on the other side of the ocean. And that's where I've found usually the best flavors, the best traditions have come from old world Europe and continue to be there. But even there, things of course have gone also to the industrial, to the commercial, where a lot of these things are kind of sacrificed, and a lot of the care and the artistry of it, the beauty of it, if you will, is oftentimes lost even there. So anyway, just wanted to give that update because it's important to see that in as much as we talk about these principles, we're also trying to live them out. There's cycles of regeneration in this. There's beauty in this. We talk a lot about that. There is in the regeneration, there's the masculine and the feminine, and mastering those dynamics, and there's sexuality, and all these things that we're always talking about here are playing themselves out here on a daily basis. And at the end of it, relationships of us with the earth, of us with each other, as far as our family, us with our community, in as much as our community was over here yesterday to participate in this. So it's worth sharing that's what's going on here. We're making progress. We're very much beginners, but at least we are making progress, right? Okay, so this came about again on the run today, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about today, but I was listening to a podcast, or not, I guess it was a YouTube video on the channel called Theories of Everything. It's put on by this younger man named Kurt Jaimangal, who I really enjoy because his whole premise is he kind of has a math and physics background, but he has started a series of interviews. He started a couple years ago where he's interviewing anybody that has either a kind of physics, mathematical, or philosophical theory of everything. And he's a very good interviewer. He's a very curious person. So he'll get on some of these kind of titanic figures that I see today have some of the best ideas. John Vervaeke, he's had Jonathan Pajot on there. And oftentimes he'll take these people through, not just an hour interview that you kind of get on some of the more lifestyle kind of YouTube channels, but you'll get him going into 3-hour interviews and 4-hour interviews. So of course, I paid attention to John Vervaeke's interviews with him and Pajot, but then more recently I saw that he'd done this 4.5-hour interview with this guy named Bernardo Kastrup, and on the title, on the thumbnail, it said something like the best interview that he'd given. And so I watched that one, and it's crazy because that interview didn't even seem like 4.5 hours as I worked my way through it over the course of a couple days. And there was a lot there. He's an individual who has an underlying theory, ontological theory. That's kind of the theory of being, that everything in the world is ultimately composed of mind, of consciousness. Somewhat related to Donald Hoffman. They have a lot of crossover between them, seeing that kind of the fundamental element of reality is consciousness. And then, there's a lot of implications that grow out of that. It's one way of dealing with the hard problem of consciousness, if any of you that are aware with that, which is a fundamental problem, especially of the kind of more accepted or popular right now materialist or physicalist worldview that struggles to explain kind of one of the fundamental questions, which is how does our experience of consciousness, like we have it right now, like I assume you are also experiencing, just like I am, even though I don't know, our experiences of the world, the experience of colors, the experience of the taste of chocolate, those things. How does that arise from matter, physical matter? Because that's kind of the general theory that underlies a lot of the scientific approach, is that all those things must arise out of matter, something that is it has a quality that is not matter-like. How does it come to be? It's the same problem with life itself. How does life arise out of non-living matter? How does consciousness arise out of non-conscious matter? And there's a big gulf there. I've kind of mentioned it a number of times, because people should know that we can't explain consciousness yet in a fundamental way. And so you can think that we have been able to, because we can do brain scans, and when we do brain scans, it's kind of associated with consciousness, but we can show all sorts of correlations, but we can't show causation, how things arise, and give an account of it, and we can't produce it either. And so it's one of the fundamental things going on in the world today, because a lot of people have a hunch that if we can understand it a little bit better, it actually will lead out to some fundamental understandings that should help us kind of deal with some of the greater problems we have today, problems of meaning, problems, our ecological problems, etc. So this is all to say that Bernardo Kastrup has a very intriguing theory. He was interviewed for this 4.5 hours, and then him and John Vervaeke were brought in to have kind of a dialogue with each other. They did a whole 3.5 hour one, and then they did a second part. Also, this one's 4 hours long, and I'm only in the middle of it. So I was listening to this on my run today, and I recommend all these thinkers. That's why I'm mentioning them and taking the time to put them out there. And while we were on the run, Bernardo Kastrup started kind of riffing on an idea that really just sunk home, because he brought in the image of a tree, right? And where I was running, and especially here at Mission Top and all around me, there are a tremendous amount of trees. And it's something that I've really come to love as part of the daily experience that I have here. Of course, there's trees almost everywhere in the world, but where I came from, in a more kind of desert environment, there were not nearly as many trees. There's lots that people have planted kind of in a valley, kind of in a human way, but here in this part of Montana, the trees go all the way up the mountains, up to the very cliffy part, where kind of the cliffy parts in the mountain arise out of the trees, but it's trees all the way. A lot of Douglas firs, ponderosa pines, a lot of conifers, but there's aspens in there too. There's I believe tamaracks. There's what other kinds of trees are there? There's cedars, a lot of cedars around here. There are pockets here of this valley that have a feeling very much like the Pacific Northwest, that has even taller trees and these huge Douglas firs and these magical moist forest parts. You can find those in little bits and pieces around this valley, and it's one of the reasons I love this valley. So anyway, trees have been more part of my daily life, and as he was kind of riffing on this idea tied to the trees, a lot of ideas came together as far as symbolic thinking, because the tree, as I mentioned in the title, is this symbol that just goes as far back as you can see into humanity. It has been important to us. There is something that when we look at trees and when we experience trees, that's the important thing about symbolism, is how do you actually experience a tree? And when we experience trees, there's something profound, there's something meaningful that calls out to us about trees. Even to the point where you can see why the environmental movement would kind of focus so much on trees, save a tree, this or that, because we have some recognition that just destroying trees or taking them out of our environment doesn't just hurt us at a scientific level, there's less oxygen in the air. There's something that is tied up with our very experience of life that when we take trees out of our environment, we're missing. There's something that kind of happens to our meaning level of life that is tied up with trees. And in as much as, I see a symbol as something that manifests a meaning to us, something profound, something that impacts our lives, a pattern, if you will, of meaning, then it's worth digging into what is this pattern of the tree that we see, and how does it actually tie into reality as I'm saying it does here in the title. This is one of those things that we're not going to get to the bottom of it today, because I have to talk about this to try to figure it out. I'm going to be dealing much with imagery as I try to explain this, because it's the best that I've got so far. It's also, if I had some other better thinker that had it more articulated, I would point to that. I'm going to be using some of Bernardo Kastrup's words on this, but even him, he was using all sorts of imagery because it's the best we can do at this point. I'm going to be using images as well. That will help, especially to kind of illustrate the point that we're making here, why trees model reality. But let's start with the fact that as you experience a tree, you look at it, you are by it. What is the experience that you get of it? Well, of course, you see this trunk extending up into the air, and you see, the basic form of the tree is that, most trees kind of, especially conifers, have somewhat of a structure that they're all vertical oriented, but they oftentimes come a little bit more to a narrow point at the top of the tree. Some are more rounded, some are more like conifers that are pointed and have that direction of verticality. But at the very least, the trunk itself and the branches are usually directed towards the vertical. And then, the trunk and the way that its primary branches branch off is very much a pattern, a fractal pattern that is then repeated down the rest of the branches, right? Out of the branches, come smaller branches that then branch off themselves. And so there is something in that all those things right there, a kind of a pillar directed upwards, a fractal pattern repeating itself. There's, of course, the green leaves or green needles of a tree that are tied up with a sense of life to us, a sense of the seasons, and as much as we see them go through their cycle, there's all those things that speak something of meaning to us. But the profound thing that I think we often miss about the tree, that you'll see in almost all these symbolic representations that we're going to look at. And so here, let me pull up one that will hit this home just to begin with. It's the image that was partly in the thumbnail. I was hoping for a bigger one, but we'll just deal with this right here. Okay, so one of the most profound symbolic aspects of the tree is that you're only seeing half the tree, right? You're only seeing that above ground part. And the thing that we can oftentimes forget is that there's this whole other hidden part of the tree going on down below at the same time. And so this above ground part is stretching out into the heavens. Oftentimes we're moved by a tree because they're lofty, right? They are kind of light, and their leaves are light and moving in the wind, and they're directed up towards the heavens. Again, there's something about that calls to us. That's why we orient all our monuments and temples and things in the same way, up towards the heavens. And so there's something about that calls to us. But then at the very same time, this trunk extends down into the ground, and you've got this same kind of pattern repeated down deep into the earth, but in the almost opposite kind of environment. Down there, it's not light and airy, it's dark and it's moist, right? Whereas the top is seen and it grabs our attention, the bottom part is hidden and dark and outside of our attention, right? But as you look at the structure, even in this image, the very same thing is happening to the tree as before. The fractal pattern is repeated down into, the depths of the earth. And so there's something that it is an opposite, but it's also, this kind of complementary opposite to the tree. And so when you become aware of that, you also see that there's something profound going on there, because without that bottom rooted structure that roots the tree, gives it its stability, as you could say, in the earth, then the tree wouldn't be able to stand up and have its direction towards the heavens. And it also would die, because there's a part of the tree that receives its energy and its nutrients from this dark, unseen, moist part of the earth through processes that they're kind of mysterious processes. We're just barely beginning to understand them. The way that the fungi interact with other fungi of the soil and the roots, and there's kind of reciprocal elements of exchange in between those, and the creation of soil, and all these things are going on there all the time, even in the winter when the top part looks as if it's dead. There's no leaves, there's no things, and the sun isn't impacting the tree in that same way. The light isn't impacting the tree in the same way. There's this other kind of stuff going on behind the scenes in the unseen realm. So this is the aspect of the tree that's important to understand if you want to see how it maps all of reality. So let's pull this image of Yggdrasil. It's one of these images of a world tree, and let's pull that onto here, back here. It's the one that was in the thumbnail, but we've got at least a little bit different version, or bigger version, sorry, of it here. And notice how, this is kind of an interesting image, because you have this kind of singular tree up at the top of this mountain, but then the whole thing itself is a tree, and it's almost like two trees in one, but there's a sense in which the tree that's kind of lower than the disc there, the disc part of the image, it's both a branch, but you could also see it as kind of roots, a rooted kind of branch that's underneath the basic world. And then at the bottom of that, there's even more roots down there at the bottom. But notice, if you can see, I hope that resolution allows you to see there are these snakes around the roots. And so this image of the world tree is something, it's another one of these images that you find in various cultures in different parts of the world. The Mayans have it. It's in their Nordic culture. This image in itself is like something made in the 1800s or something. I think a painter made it based off of a poem or whatnot. So this one doesn't like go to some ancient origin, but it's based off of the descriptions of the world tree. There's some other elements that you'll notice about this. You have this kind of mountain coming out of the ocean, which, if you remember how we've talked about the mountain of paradise, the Garden of Eden being a mountain of paradise with the tree of life at the top, there, all that is there. And again, this one's Nordic. I don't think it's supposed to be tying into Christianity. You have rivers flowing out from that mountain, just as it's described in Genesis. And then you have the basic shape of the world as it's often presented symbolically in ancient cultures, which is the world is like a round, a disc round mass of matter and earth, and then that's surrounded by waters. So there are these waters surrounding the earth part of that, and then you'll see this snake there that's eating itself. And we've talked about this snake before. What's it called? The Ouroboros, I think, is the basic name that this snake is given. And then all of that is kind of composing this other tree that then goes down underneath the earth into an underworld where, again, you have those roots with snakes in it. And so on these world trees, it's very common that up like in the top part of the world, which is kind of the seen part of the tree, there's oftentimes birds resting in the tree. There's oftentimes fruit being produced on that tree. And then down below, in that underworld part, there'll be these snakes hanging out there, snakes, bugs, those things that lurk there in the dark. Okay. So, what's going on with this? Why is this an image of reality? Why is it one that gets used over and over in different cultures? And just to give an example of how it might look in different cultures, let me put up a Mayan image. Oh, great. This one was very big. I'm going to have to expand it. Okay, it looks like the resolution should be okay. So I guess this is a Mayan image. At least I hope it was. I can never totally verify the authenticity when I pull these off the internet. But you have kind of the very same thing going on. You have the seen part of the tree above the ground. It seems to be like there's even maybe some water running off the tree. Again, very much something that you see repeated. There's a sense in which this tree is also functioning like a tree and a mountain at the same time, which you very oftentimes see. You've got the green leaves up, but then you have this underworld part that recognizes that same structure going down. And in the underworld, there's some figures down there, which often might be figures, gods of the underworld or figures of the underworld that live down there, right? Okay, so there's that one, and I'm trying to think if I have any other one. I don't think I do. So those are just some illustrations to get you going to see how this pattern repeats in various different cultures. So as Bernardo Kastrup talked, he brought out the way that he mentioned these attributes that I'm trying to pull out of this top part of the tree, the seen part, and the bottom part. And he's trying to make the argument that as far as our society tries to understand the world, we've almost exclusively focused on this top part of the tree. Okay, and this is the part of the tree that is more tied up with you could say, of a spiritual nature. The word spirit, when you see it used in ancient texts like the Greek, I think the word for it is pneuma, and then there's a different word for it in Hebrew, but it all in both cases the word is used is the very same word as wind or breath, or it's tied up with air. And so there's this notion that whenever you hear things talked about spiritual things, it's talking about airy, light, wind or breath, things that are very much always tied up with the heavens, that have an airy, floating quality. It's usually tied up with abstract concepts of meaning, and it's usually tied up with goodness. So think of our culture, if anything, especially given its Protestant Christian underpinnings, especially here in the United States, we tend to focus on these kinds of things as being the core attributes of the world. Its spiritual nature, its purposeful nature. It's God is always tied up with God the Father. You could say is always tied up with this part of the tree. And light. Light. I haven't mentioned light enough. That light is always tied up with the heavens, and we see that all these things are good. This is what we want to seek for. This is what the world is all about, is bringing more light to the world and goodness to the world, and meaning to the world. And it's also often tied up with love, a sense of order and togetherness. All these attributes are tied with this top part of the tree. From a scientific sense, this could even be gravity, as it were, and which is a force that brings things together, right? And it's interesting because in Interstellar, with this big video essay that I've still yet to release, one of the main concepts of that show was to it was to show that two things could travel through time, right? And they became integral to the story, and that was gravity and love. So it's kind of tying gravity and love together. There is this sense in us that we kind of even look at the scientific world, and something like gravity feels like love, that which draws things together. And all this would be associated with this kind of side of the tree, and it's what our world focuses on. But what we often don't realize is that there is a sin tied up. This isn't all good. We see, we want as much spirit, as much light in our lives, as much goodness in our lives as possible, right? And what we oftentimes don't see is there's actually a fundamental sin associated with this side of things, even from a Christian perspective, and that would be the sin of pride, right? You can see how that's a sin of too much light, too much goodness, too much order, trying to seek a perfection and going too far with it, right? And so, if anything, our society has focused too much on this to a degree that, like the trees out there, we oftentimes forget that there's this other undergirding part of reality, as it were, of the tree, of the world, and especially of ourselves. Okay, so let's remember the attributes of this other unseen part. It's earth, it's body, it's darkness, right? It's shadow. It's moist and dark. It's tied up with more with a cave or a womb. Okay, and in as much as we're talking about this all the time, of course, yeah, the upper part is tied up with masculinity, right? Masculine kind of structure. This other part, again, the earth, dark, moist stuff, is always tied up with femininity. And so, in as much as the top is all about articulation, drawing things together into systems of order, this lower part is about mystery, is about shadow, is about all unreal potentials in the world. It's the great zone of potential and disorder and chaos, even if you want to use that kind of phrase. However, at the same time, here's where the symbol of the tree is profound. that's where a great life force comes, and a great stability comes from for everything that is above the earth. It's where the tree itself emerges from, right? Is from that dark, moist, hidden environment. And so, for example, the goddess of spring, oftentimes in a lot of mythological structures, lives in the underworld, but emerges out of the underworld into the spring. And that's what you see. It was tremendous to see it this whole winter, going from this dead kind of upper outer world where everything started emerging out of the ground in its green, life-filled force. Well, there's something like that going on with us, rooted more in our earthly part, our body part, our dark part. This is the place where it's our ground of being and where we're rooted in, and where this tremendous energy comes from with us. But it's also, as you look at it, kind of a moral nature, it's a morally ambiguous part. You could see it as tied up inherently with evil, like, oh, dark is evil. And that's one thing that our culture has done. Light is good, dark is evil. But this whole dark realm, this mysterious realm, this realm of potential, isn't inherently evil, but it is potentially evil. So it's morally ambiguous. And so it's the zone of potential evil, but it's also the realm of all new potential goods either, and new possibilities of both of those. Possibilities of evil, possibilities of new kinds of good. All the possibilities are there. And then it's also tied up with the realm of the passions. Okay, so from a Christian perspective, it's from this underworld, this more dark, feminine side of reality, that the sins of the passions come from. So it's and as you think of your body, your passions aren't there just kind of all in the forefront of your consciousness would be tied up more with this upper part. And of course your passions lie kind of in you, and they're part of you, and they oftentimes arise, you could say, and that, listen to that word, they kind of arise out of you at different moments that you can't control. And so oftentimes, what I've come to see is the incorrect thing to do is we try to repress, right? We try to kind of forget they're there, just ignore them, repress them. But of course, we know that that's a losing strategy, because if we try to do that, at some point they're going to burst out in ways that we can't control, and maybe even take over. Okay, so now kind of zoom, if you can understand how these things work in yourself, this upper part of the tree and the lower part of the tree in yourself, kind of zoom back one level reality to the world and our society itself as it's operating today, and you'll see how we have focused on this masculine world of ordering things, of abstraction and articulation and hierarchies and climbing the hierarchies. That's where even the feminine, because we've lost this other feminine spirit, this dark, mysterious feminine spirit, even femininity has tried to get women to be masculine and climb the hierarchies and articulate more and fix and order and pinpoint, just as this upper world requires of us to do. And in not honoring that other hidden part, the dark part of the world, the part that manifests our evils and our passions, of not kind of accepting them as part of us, trying to repress them, keep them on the margins, as we did for so much in society. What has happened in society? Well, all those marginal things, those passions and darkness part of the world, they'll eventually emerge, and in ways that oftentimes we can't control. And so we have weird things today that now a lot of people do realize, okay, yeah, this is this realm of the passion. What should we do with it? There are these marginal characters and figures. What do we do? Well, maybe we should let them be in control, right? So that's where this notion of a flipped world comes in, where kind of the underworld or the marginal world, the idea is, well, let's flip it. Maybe these people are the best of us, and they should be in control. And that's very much like in you repressing your passions and ignoring them like they're not there, and then coming to realize, no, actually I do have passions. They are part of me, and they want to be recognized as important. And then saying, well, what should I do about that? Well, how about I let these passions rule in me? And then you have a person that's ruled by their passions. The passions become king, as it were, as far as your kingdom of yourself. And we know that that doesn't turn out well. So here's where reality comes in. And it's funny because the more I listen to anybody talk about trying to describe reality, whether it's a physicist, whether it's a philosophical person, whether it is a religious person, whether it's Jonathan Pageau from a symbolic perspective, whether it's John Vervaeke trying to combine both philosophy and science, whether it's somebody that's dealing much more in the realms of just physics or something. Interestingly, again and again, in different ways of describing things, both these parts of the world seem to always come to be part of the ultimate picture of reality. So that's what's led me to say that the answer keeps on being that the unified, the union of these two realms of reality, the light and the dark, the airy and the spiritual with the earthy, the realm of the seen kind of gravity that draws the universe together, as opposed to the dark energies. The dark energy, that's this concept of physics, which seems to be trying to push the universe apart or whatnot. These dichotomies are always existing. The answer always seems to come back to they need to work in a unified nature, right? And that's where you have masculine and feminine. What's the answer to these two great divisions in society? Well, they need to be coupled and working together. That's where you get the yin and the yang symbol, which is still one of the best ones to illustrate how these two things work together. And again, you'll notice that I've had to rely so much on just illustrations, on symbols, on concepts like air and air and earth and light and darkness, because I don't know any better way to describe this. And that's where, if you're still, this feels all kind of mushy, it is kind of mushy. I don't know a better way to articulate this. But let me at least use some more images to kind of show some of the best things that I've found to illustrate these kind of different natures of the world. Okay, so I'm going to pull in now some of the images from Jonathan Pageau's brother's book, Mathieu Pageau, where he uses all sorts of images like this throughout his presentation. And this one also seems to come in a way that's on its side. Let me see if I can, sometimes a shift or a command will rotate. Dang, I don't know if this one's going to rotate in the right way. So sorry guys, this one you're going to have to just imagine on its side. I'll figure out how to do this on my own time. So this is supposed to be oriented with the tree, of course, facing in its right way. But notice this is on the cover of the book. And so notice these very same elements that were in that world tree picture. You have the tree, you have its branching nature going up, you have, of course, the leaves, but then you have the recognition of the roots that go in the under part of the ground. And if there's kind of two sets of symbols that Mathieu Pageau goes over again and again in the book, it's the dichotomy of heaven and earth. So that would be the upper part of the tree, and then the roots that go down into it, and then the union of those two things. And then he has these concepts of time and space. And we've been talking a lot about sacred time, sacred space, things like that. So just think of how time, we're not talking about time in modern kind of linear time. We're talking about time as in cyclical time. And so cyclical time is very much tied up with the feminine, and it's a cycle of regeneration, of things constantly changing and moving nowhere. Think how kind of the cycle of the seasons, things are constantly regenerating and moving, but there's no progression, like the seasons are all moving towards something. They're just in the same place, spinning, constantly changing, ever changing, but never kind of reaching some new state. So even in this image, which again I wish I had in the right orientation, you have out on the outside this image of the Ouroboros, of the snake eating itself. That's that image of time this concept of constant regeneration. So time is kind of eating itself and progressing, but at the same time regenerating at the very same time. That's where you get this self-eating snake that's oftentimes seen as kind of living on the border of the world. Whereas then the pillar, the space, is best embodied by like a pillar that fixes something in time. So yeah, you have time kind of moving on the outside think of it as a wheel with an axle in the middle. The axle in the middle is fixed. And in fact, there's a point of space in the very middle of the wheel that doesn't move at all, kind of by a paradox, whereas everything else is churning around that. Well, the axle is the space principle, the masculine principle, the fixed aspect, and then the time is the moving aspect around it, okay? All right, so let's move on to a different one of theirs, or of Matthew Pajot's. Let's see, this one would be a good one. I'm worried because this is also, oh man, they're all in this orientation. Give me just a few seconds here, everyone, to play with my little settings on this program that I'm using, Streamlabs OBS, to see if I can figure out how to rotate this. There's got to be a way. Okay, flip, horizontal, rotate 90 degrees. Aha! There we go. Okay, so now we have a very different image, one of the images that he uses in the book, and in fact, I'm going to put this one to the side while we look at a different one. Wait for this one to last. It will make sense in just a second. And instead, use this one, which I'm also going to need to rotate. There we go. And the reason I'm showing you all these images is so that you can see that in the lack of being able to articulate all these things, the imagery, the symbolism becomes your next best thing to try to understand these principles that are very difficult to understand, right? Very difficult to articulate. So here we've got two things going on. On the vertical plane, you'll see that he's got this half dome labeled heaven and then this half dome labeled earth below it. Okay, so that would be, like I said, one of the way that the whole book starts out is to say that there's this one fundamental way of seeing this dichotomy in the world, heaven and earth. And remember that the Bible, first verse there in Genesis, says, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. And even there in the Bible, there's this sense that what creation all starts and comes out of is some darkness, right? And a lot of creation sequences in a number of religions, as I'm learning, see that everything emerges out of something that's more like a chaotic darkness, just as a new creation of a plant or something emerges out of the ground. So that's worth noticing that is usually even before this division of heaven and earth. There's oftentimes kind of seen as one step before that, even this division where there's this completely dark realm of potentiality that then there's a fundamental division made in, and that would be heaven and earth in that potentiality. So anyway, he's got them illustrated there, heaven and earth, and you can see in this image in the center, he's brought them together. But then at the very same time, he has on the right hand here this image of, in essence, a tree. You'll see its arrows, but look how some arrows go up. Those would be like the branches above ground, and the image is down. And so there's heaven and earth in that as well. But there's also this other concept of space. So you see he's labeled that space because a tree is in a sense a pillar, is well fixed. And then over on the left hand, he's got this circle with water in it, and you'll see that the circle, kind of an arrow that looks like a rotation. You can see that snake right back in there, the snake that's eating its tail, as kind of that same image of the serpent, which is, by the way, why you take the serpent and the tree of life in the Garden of Image, and you have these both of these things just right there, which I should mention, the Garden of Eden is oftentimes seen as an image of both these worlds, of both heaven and earth. Because think of a garden, right? A garden is something that is in some sense nature, kind of wild nature, but in some sense it's been channeled and coupled in a way by again that ordering power. So a garden is the combination of those two as well, and a tree with a snake coiled around it is the very same image at the same time. So he brings them both together here in the middle, where you have light and dark, heaven and earth. There in the middle, you have a tree with roots, with branches going up and roots going down at the same time. And then you've got, it's kind of hard to see, but wrapped around the tree is his kind of serpentine kind of thing. So you have all those things brought into that central figure. Here, I'm going to kind of blow it up even more so you can see this very central little image right there. You can see he's tried to bring it all together into one. And there's paintings where you'll see this exact image of the tree of life sitting there with a snake coiled around it. And oftentimes, like, you'll see it both tied with Satan, but at the same time, you'll also see the snake tied as Christ in other images. Christ kind of up on the cross in a way that looks kind of snaky. Okay, so here's something to realize, is that both the symbol of the cross has both these dimensions, again, the vertical dimension and the horizontal. There's heaven and there's earth right there. But Christ himself, and this is one of Jonathan Pageau's points, he says is an image of all of this together, the union of heaven and earth. And that's what Christ is, right? He's part God, he's part man, he's the union of the two. He's the lowest and the highest. He's heaven and he's earth in that sense. He's Alpha and Omega. He's the full picture of both these things. And that's where, again, if you don't see the value of the darker part of things, the lower part, and you try to take that out, then you also aren't seeing Christ. But that's what our society, you can see how our society, even my faith tradition, has tried to portray God and Christ and reality as the pure ideal. It's all light, it's all good, it's all order. But again, you leave out that dark feminine spirit underlying things, the hidden, the mysterious part, all these attributes that were talked about, and the world goes wacko. As funny as that sounds. And that's why you get these movies like Interstellar, like Logan, like Blade Runner 2049, where the mother figure is gone out of the world. They all contain a world that's dying or dead, right? And then you have, interestingly, the story in all three of those is a story of a father figure who's kind of a father figure that needs to be redeemed, trying to be reunited with a daughter figure, a young feminine figure that kind of has a potential to become a new mother in the world. And you can see this is some of the themes that are going to be coming out in this Interstellar movie. But what I'm trying to show you is kind of jump all over the place here and show how these symbols and these images, it's not just woo-woo stuff. It's not just kind of make-believe stuff. It goes all the way back into antiquity. It goes into philosophical and religious thinkers today. It goes into our stories today. This stuff it's everywhere. And that's why I keep on coming back to, like, this is the fundamental, something about this. We dance around it with all sorts of different terms and whatnot, but this is the fundamental nature of reality. And it's something that I think we know we need to understand, in a sense, if we want to get to this next stage of human development, you could say, an understanding of ourselves. All right, let me get rid of this. Oops, that's me. Let me get rid of this image and just put up a few more to kind of still hit home these things. Just trying to get rid of that image, and we're left with this other one that I was going to show you. So the Pageau brothers, one thing that I have appreciated very much from them is the fact that they see the value of this union of the masculine and the feminine. And at the end of the day, there's this way that this lower aspect of things, this feminine lower aspect of things, which is tied into the passions, which is tied into the potentiality for evil, and things like that, in its ideal form, coupled to the masculine, it's not just a lower thing, it's brought up to the very top. Okay, and so look at this symbol right here, where he says it's labeled space crowned by time. And so if you look back, this kind of imagery has been there in antiquity since the beginning too, and that's why I think they see it is that in Eastern Orthodoxy, which is at least Jonathan Pageau's tradition. I don't think Mathieu Pageau is joined Orthodoxy, and I'd love to kind of explore. I've never heard exactly the full story of why Mathieu Pageau doesn't join his brother in that. Anyway, you see how this kind of mountain figure right here, this is more a figure of a mountain undergirded by, you see there's kind of a water barrier. So he's trying to illustrate, the earthly dark area underneath, the mysterious aspect of reality. That's why there's those question marks. They haven't been ordered as the top structure is. And then the top mountain-like structure is this ordered mountain coming to a point, to a zenith, as mountains do, and as we see with all our monuments, they're always coming to a steeple, a point, right? But there at the very top, there's this crown. And what's the crown? It's that round circle. It's even that Ouroboros that we talked about before. And so this is one of those things that I'm still trying to understand, but it is in some way the answer, if you'd say it, is that up there at the top is masculinity coupled with femininity in a way that brings that lower aspect of femininity all the way to the top as the crown or glory of the masculine principle. Okay, so if you see it here, now let me show you an image that I've shown you before, but you might not have noticed this, which is, oh boy, how did I get to Pride and Prejudice here? Sorry, guys. You see, I have a lot of stuff hanging from past stuff. Let me get those out of the way. I think I deleted like a whole other thing. Anyway, this is Jonathan Pageau's. We can recover here. This is Jonathan Pageau's image of everything, his cosmic image, where in one image he's trying to illustrate reality, in essence, right? And so if you look at it, now having looked at all these other images we've looked at, like the world tree, you're going to see the same thing. Remember the world tree had this kind of mountain surrounded by water, and in the water was the serpent. Well, look, there's that serpent, that big monster. This one's not eating its tail. But you'll see variation in this stuff. It's not always going to be the same. There's this bottom of the mountain. Down at the bottom of the mountain, you'll see, the skull of Adam. You'll see Adam and Eve being cast away from the mountain. You'll see a wall and water flowing out there into the chaotic waters. And then it works up, and the whole thing is a tree. There's like several layers of this tree that all works up to the top, where it's like the tree of life. And he's made the tree of life also the cross with Christ there at the top. And so there the cross right there at the zenith of the tree of life, where you have the cross, the vertical meeting the horizontal of the cross, there's Christ right in that position. But also notice right around them is this dark circle. And so you'll hear Pageau talk about this, and also a crown of thorns up ahead. So that the crown of thorns is another way that illustrates this so great. Look how Christ takes this thing that's a low part of the world. The thorns you can imagine as out away from the mountain, as something that's out there in the chaos, the thorny part of the wilderness. Well, that is brought up to the very top of the image, and it becomes the very crown that Christ is made king when he's on the cross. And it says, Christ, the King of the Jews, there, above the thing. So that's simultaneously at that very moment with Christ on the cross, he's both the highest thing, a king, and the lowest thing. And he's wearing a crown, but the crown is made from the thorns, from the lowest parts of reality. And so there's this sense in which reality coupled together in its highest portion has the masculine and the feminine, the highest and the lowest, all there coupled into one thing. And it's very powerful to see it illustrated that way, I think. Now, as to what that means in living it out in reality, that's where I still struggle, right? To figure out what it is that it means exactly to bring the lowest up to be the crowning part of the highest. That, of course, it's tied up with everything. It's tied up with family life. How does, the woman who, as we've talked about, plays more this lower, more feminine role. Of course, there's all sorts of complexity with that, and to give all the usual caveats, lower does not mean worse, does not mean less important, as we're trying to illustrate with this whole thing. But how does the woman as the more feminine part become the crowning glory of the entire family and picture, and the man himself, right? It's all these kind of questions that that there's something there, but it's hard to articulate. So any help you guys can give, any examples you guys can give in trying to get this last point would help me as I try to make sense of all this, right? And yeah, I think I'm reaching about the end of where I wanted to go with this today, and just kind of take you through that whole sequence of both symbols, but also, again, this isn't just religious stuff. We've ended on a fairly religious image, but you will find this kind of image all over the world, this tie between these images of trees. And then if you listen, these are the very same kinds of dualities and necessary couplings of dualities that lie in our most cutting edge science, I guess you could say. And like, for example, one example is in our cognition. John Vervaeke talks about this. There seemed to be an integral part of our cognition is an ordering kind of virtual engine of our cognition, and a dissolving virtual engine of our cognition that orders things into concepts, because we have to be able to kind of see relevant things in the world and order them into concepts and categories and whatnot. But just as quickly, we need to be able to break down those categories and those things in order to see different potentialities, different concepts in the world, because we can't order and define everything around us, all of reality. Anyway, that's just to say that right there in science is this same kind of principle, and the answer of how our cognition works is in this maybe like simultaneous kind of resonating between those two virtual engines as they both fire at the same time. I mean, that's just one example, but again, you see this in something like all the matter of the universe. And then scientists explain, we can't explain how the universe is held together with just this. There's something dark and unseen. There's this dark matter to the universe at the same time that we can't exactly see or pinpoint, but it's out there, and it seems to couple the universe together. It's crazy how these things converge, and yet nobody exactly has the articulated answer of what it all means perfectly. We know that it does mean something, but we're still working on it, folks. And I am, and everybody that I can pay attention to, brilliant people, and nobody has the answer. No John Vervaeke, Pajot, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, no these scientists, Ian McGilchrist, or I don't know. There's endless amounts of brilliant thinkers in the world, and they all talk, like, you listen to them, they all talk around this stuff in different ways, but nobody's got it in the way that's like, aha, that is the next way to get us to all to understand it, and out of it comes this greater understanding that kind of leads us to what everybody I think wants, which is reaching a deeper level of meaning that helps us to live our lives better in a way that all of us can live better in this world, in as much as that's what I think everyone's after, is concepts that then help us to manifest a greater, more enhanced way of life than we have seen in the world. I mean, the kind of analogy that I would give it is, and you don't even have to be, hopefully you don't have to be Christian to appreciate this kind of analogy, and I'll even use another ones, but it's the kind of changes in our fundamental way that we live our life of kind of like a pre-Christian world and a post-Christian world, where we see people fundamentally differently in our societies, the rights that we give them, the respect that we give them, because of a shift in worldview that came with Christianity. I'm sure you could say the same thing to something like Buddhism, which when that emerged into the world, shifted the way that people lived their lives fundamentally because of the fundamental shift that it brought in terms of how people understood themselves and the world, and the way that it offered them a possibility of further growth and development. We have this notion that growth and development as human beings kind of stops by the time you're 20 or something like that, and you're an adult now, and that's kind of it. Now you just live your life. But Plato and some of the what I think some of the wisest thinkers didn't see it like that at all. That we should and we can and should keep on developing throughout our entire lives, in ways that we become enhanced as human beings. But that means that culture at large, humanity at large, should also be able to do the same thing, I think, which is to develop into new stages. And you can see these kind of stages with children, right? You see a child sometimes in the space of a day or a week completely transition stages where they operate now in the world in a different way. I really think that's what we're trying to get at here at this period of the world, and we're struggling to do it. There's kind of some birthing pains, if you will, going on as we struggle to figure this all out. So anyway, thank you today. I think that's a good stopping point. I'm going to come back, make sure we didn't miss any questions or comments, so go ahead and get those in right now before we end the stream. Otherwise, this was the main portion of what I hoped to get out today. All right, so Wis was talking there at the beginning, about the way that I'm trying to live out the best version of these principles that I can understand and do right now. And so he was identifying with the way that right in something as mundane, not even mundane, but as seemingly brutal as, slaughtering an animal or something like that, there's beauty in it. There's beauty in the whole process. There's beauty in our food. There's a coupling. Here's one of the ways to see the way these things can come together. There's meaning. There's potential meanings out there in the world, and then there's the potential. There is the matter and the earth of the world. There are situations and I guess you can just say potentiality. But it's when you couple those two. So you take something like slaughtering an animal, and then you couple it with meaning and with beauty, and that's where you have the coupling of the two, right? There's where you have the greatest kind of reality that you can have, which is a reality that manifests meaning, where the two are intrinsically coupled. You can't have meaning and, let's say, God or spirit, it can't even really exist ever unless it's manifested in something in the world, right? That's where Christ is this union of God and man, heaven and earth. That is what creates actual meaning in the world, is when the abstract concept of the meaning thing meets some pattern of matter or potential in the world, where they then can be one thing, and out of that one thing comes something beautiful, something that we experience as right and beautiful, in this coupling of these two aspects of the world. There would be an example right there of how this works, but of course, I don't know, that description still seems rough to me. You see, it reminds me of some of the Native Indian American. Yeah, so Native Americans have the world tree concept as well, and so many of these basic concepts too. Oftentimes they have the world as a hoop. They have the world as a year, as a cyclical year. You'll find that ancient, not even ancient, but these more, and it's not even primitive. Primitive is the wrong word too, because it's not like they're any less advanced as us. They just thought differently, or any less smart than us, or things like that. We have this arrogance that comes with our technology and our science, that we think we're better because of those things, but our quality of life is not necessarily better in many ways. So anyway, yeah, you look at any of these cultures that were more traditional cultures, more symbolic cultures, let's say, and you'll find the same symbols, shapes, patterns manifested in very different parts of the world, which suggests to me that either these go, have some even more ancient origin. That's one way of seeing it, or there are certain things in the world that so well map onto a pattern of meaning that is fundamental to how we understand the world, that we can't help but be attracted to these certain things in the world that manifest that pattern. So just as we see it with trees, you also see it with mountains. You see it tied up with water and the ocean. These are the things that you'll find like in virtually every society, those kinds of basic symbols, because they manifest some fundamental pattern that we know. Okay, good to have you on here too, Christian, today. And yeah, Wiss said temples and trees toward the sun. Christian, is there a snake eating itself there? So yeah, we went over that. And now that you see these symbols, like look out in the world, looking even into stories, and you'll find these symbols still used all the time. I think oftentimes without any even conscious knowledge of what they mean, they just seem like they fit. So for example, the movie Dark, or the series Dark on Netflix, which I always say with a little bit of trepidation, because in a sense, I do recommend it, in as much as I think it's a very symbolically packed, very relevant series to our times, but it's also like brutally violent and sexually explicit and just hard to watch because there is so much darkness in it. I think I've said that before, but anyway, just be forewarned before you go down the rabbit hole with that series. But anyway, this image of the snake eating itself is in there. You'll see it all over the place. And now that you know kind of what it means, oftentimes you'll be able to see, I see how this fit into this concept, whether it's being used as a symbol of regeneration, as a symbol of cyclical time, as a symbol of sometimes it's seen as the fundamental nature of reality, because the Ouroboros, for example, in one of the Jungian books I have by Eric Neumann, I think The Origin and History of Consciousness, that Ouroboros is seen as that kind of pre-divided world kind of state of being. So in as much as I was talking, like even in the Bible, there's this sense that before heaven and earth, there was this kind of pre-cosmogonic state of chaotic waters. Well, that is very often tied up with the Ouroboros, this thing that contains everything. It contains the end and the beginning, etc. So anyway, it's something to pay attention to, and you'll see more and more instances of it out in the world. Okay, Wiss said, Christian, well played. So yeah, I think we've gotten to the end of most of your comments. Thanks for participating today. I hope this was useful. I know it's things that we've talked about before, but a lot of these things are worth returning back to, seeing in different lights, sometimes, again, in the combination of different ideas. Or today it was literally listen to this thinker while I'm surrounded by trees, while running. Running is this thing that puts you into kind of a different state of consciousness, oftentimes, that really kind of hammered it home for me, such that I could come here and talk about it with more enthusiasm and hopefully articulation. So thank you, Nick, you for your kind compliment. I hope we could even come close to that level, like being a university lecturer, and hopefully even being more, practical is always the aim too. So again, thanks for being here. Hopefully this was useful and informative. And if nothing else today, go out there today and look and see the hidden part of the trees today, and it will change the way that you experience the tree, right? Nick mentions Ernest Becker, Viktor Frankl, and other post-Freudian thinkers. Okay, yeah, I will. Ernst Becker, that's a new name. Viktor Frankl, I'm more familiar with, but I've only read, his fundamental book, The Man's Search for Meaning. So I'm sure there's more to him than just that. So yeah, thank you, Nick, for the recommendations. With that, I'm going to sign off and get on to the rest of my day, as I'm sure many of you have, or maybe some of yours are winding down. So wherever you are in the world, hope you have the great rest of your day. And here's me, Gary Nuila, signing off from Mission Top. Hope you have a great rest of your day.